You can't teach a dill pickle nothing. Not because it lacks intelligence, but because it has already decided what it is going to be. Soaked, saturated, sealed in its own self-righteous seasoning. And the longer it sits in that brine, the more it forgets that it was ever meant to be anything fresh. There is a difference between having pain and prioritizing pain above everything else. And pain is real, okay? Don't get me wrong. Whether we are talking about physical pain or emotional pain, it does deserve attention. And that pain, whatever it is, it needs to be processed. But when your emotional pain becomes the highest authority, everything else starts bowing to it. Peace, optional. Truth, distorted. Care for others, conditional. When someone begins to hold their anger, their hurt, their pain above connection, above resolution, above someone else's well-being, they may no longer just be hurting. They may be operating from a hardened position. When emotions begin to dictate whether care is allowed or withheld, that's no longer just emotional expression. That can become a breakdown in judgment. Because care is not supposed to be filtered through, do I like you? Am I still mad at you for that thing you said or you did? Do you deserve my cooperation? Care is supposed to be coming from someplace deeper than that. Imagine being so anchored in resentment that you resist or block help. Not because the help is wrong, not because it's not needed, but because your anger refuses the source. Imagine choosing your anger over someone else's well-being, like a third-party well-being. That's not just being upset. That is a calcification of reasoning, a narrowing of compassion, spiritual stenosis, emotional stagnation, self-righteous solidification. And when resentment interferes with necessary care, harm is no longer just emotional, right? I mean, feelings, they can't, or at least they should not be what overrides someone else's safety. I think that we can agree that bitterness does not stay contained, right? It circulates in the retelling of the story, in the reframing of your position, in the recruiting of others to get on board with you, until the whole system is no longer centered in truth, but in a shared brine of repeated pain. Now let's take this and we're going to bring it into the garden, okay? A cucumber is alive with possibilities, right? It's hydrating, it's cooling, it's nourishing, it's full of water, minerals, and quiet goodness. It does not demand attention, but it does sustain life. Now enter le pickle. The same origin, mais ce n'est pas la même chose. It is not the same thing. A pickle is altered. It is salted, soaked, and preserved. Now a little brine, this adds flavor, depth, and zing. But too much for too long? Now we're not enhancing. Now we are overriding the original design. Nutritionally, cucumbers bring hydration and gentle nourishment. Pickles, the opposite. They are high in sodium. They are intense and they are stimulating. Are they tasty? Oui, bien sûr. Are they sustaining? Not really. They excite the palate, but they do not feed what needs to grow. And bitterness is the same way. It's strong, it's loud, it feels powerful, but it does not nourish what needs to grow. All right, where can we find this mirrored in our body? Glad you asked. Here we go. It's the gallbladder. It is a small organ tucked right underneath our liver on the right-hand side of the abdomen. It is small, it's quiet, and it is easy to ignore. Its main job is to store and release bile. Bile is good. It's necessary, actually. It helps us to break down the fats in our diet, and it keeps the digestion flowing. But when bile sits for too long, when it thickens, and when it is not released properly, it hardens into gallstones. And then something that was meant to process life is now a blockage to it. P.S. These gallstones do not form overnight. They build up slowly, silently, until one day, boom, obstruction, inflammation, and pain. This often requires surgery, like quite often emergency surgery, to remove what was never meant to stay. Now, there's a story in the Bible that reflects this, and we're gonna do it. We're gonna talk about it. This is in the New Testament. It is Matthew chapter 18, and we are gonna start with verse 21. Okay, so this is where Peter comes to have a conversation with Jesus, and we're gonna start there. Okay. Then came Peter to him, Jesus, and said, Lord, how oft shall my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? Till 7 times? Jesus saith unto him, I say not unto thee until 7 times, but until 70 times 7. Therefore is the kingdom of heaven likened unto a certain king, which would take account of his servants. So here, in the rest of chapter 18, Jesus tells a parable, right? He's basically saying, I'm going to tell you a story of a king on earth that's going to reflect the heavenly kingdom. And so he tells the story. And in the story, there is a king who calls up his servants to take account of them. And there was one amongst them a servant that owed this king like an enormous debt. And he begged and pleaded to be forgiven. And the king does, right? So this servant has been forgiven an enormous debt. He's been cleared, released, given mercy that he didn't earn from this king. But then this same servant, he leaves the court and he finds another servant that owes him some money, right? A much smaller amount. And instead of extending the same grace that he just received himself, he grabs the servant. He demands payment. He refuses mercy. He even punishes this other servant with imprisonment until such time that the servant can pay him back. Right? This is literally the same man, the same life. Okay? He was just forgiven his debts, his insults, his trespasses. But he is struggling to extend that same forgiveness to others for even smaller offenses. But the story doesn't end there. The other servants see what happened, and they are very troubled by it, right? They see the hypocrisy. They see the imbalance. They see the lack of mercy, even after mercy was so freely given. And they go report it to the king. P.S. No one needs to report you to the king or to God when others can already see your behavior for what it is. Graceless, heartless, self-serving instead of love-preserving. We see this echoed in what we now call the golden rule, right? Treat others how you wish to be treated. So if you receive grace, can you not also give it? Anyway, all right, back to the parable, right? So the king calls his servant back and he basically says to him, you wicked servant, I forgave all of that debt because you begged me to do it. Should you not have also had compassion for your fellow servant, just as I had for you? And then the mercy that had been freely given gets withdrawn. And the king hands over this servant to be punished until his debt has been repaid. And Jesus closes the story with a warning. All right, the last line, Matthew chapter 18, verse 35. So likewise shall my heavenly Father do unto you, if ye from your hearts forgive not every one of his brother their trespasses. So essentially here, Jesus is saying, that's what's going to happen to you. If you hold yourself above others, if you are unforgiving, even when you have been forgiven, then my Father's not going to treat you nicely either, right? And that's the danger of unresolved bitterness, right? You can receive grace and still refuse to give it. You can be released, but you can still choose to hold someone else hostage. And in that moment, it is no longer about justice. It's about preservation, right? Preserving the hurt, preserving the story, or at least your version of the story. Preserving the position of being right. And sometimes we don't just withhold grace from others. We withhold it from ourselves. Sitting in our own brine, replaying our own trespasses, unable to release what has already been released to us. And that's the shift, right? That's the moment where the cucumber becomes the pickle. Because the goal can quietly shift from, let's resolve this, to, let me remain right in this. And righteousness without grace, c'est dangereux. It feels holy, but it blocks healing and it blocks love. Now let's step into the garden of grace and offer up a prayer to help us clear what has been binding and brining us. Grand gardener, keeper of the flow, of growth, of gentle renewal, search me. Where bitterness has been sitting for too long, where what was meant to move has started to harden, soften me. Where I have chosen self-righteousness over reconciliation, humble me gently. Where my spirit has narrowed, widen me again. Break down what is calcified in me. Restore the flow. Teach me to release what I keep rehearsing. Guard me not only from becoming bitter, but from being shaped by the bitterness of others. Give me discernment to love without absorbing, to care without carrying what is not mine, and to stand in truth without being pulled into someone else's brine. Protect my spirit from contamination, my heart from hardening, and my mind from rehearsing what you are asking me to release. Make me fresh again, responsive, open, alive. Amen. Now, bitterness doesn't just make you salty. It convinces you that your saltiness is sacred. And once that happens, you may not be protecting truth anymore. You may be preserving yourself. And once we start preserving ourselves at all costs, we stop asking, what's true? And we start defending what feels justified. And when you refuse to release what has been released to you, you may move on physically, but something in you stays behind. Perpetually marinating in your hurt and saltiness, stewing in your own vinegar, will turn you into a crunchy pickle, overpowering everything else on your plate. Dill pickles, they tend to leach their saltiness into anything and anyone around them. If left unchecked, then soon everything, every interaction is tainted through the palate of bitterness. The saltiness can accumulate, hardening your heart, making forgiveness even harder. In the most extreme cases, pickles become petrified to change as they have spent so long building their identity around the hurt. And I also mean preserving the preservation type of petrified. Right? We've seen this before, right? Lot's wife, there's a big, that story in Genesis, right? Lot's wife in the Bible, she didn't just look back. She couldn't let go. She couldn't move forward. She could not fathom her life any different. Maybe she didn't want to. Maybe she was just scared of who she could be if she accepted the grace that was offered to her in escaping Sodom and Gomorrah. When Lot's wife looks back, she becomes positively calcified. Literally. She's so rooted in her way of being that she was made an example of by God. This is what can happen when we struggle to accept or act with grace. Perpetually petrified, encased in our own saltiness, a pillar of salt. So no, mes petits choux, you were never designed to sit with your bitterness until it hardens into stones. You were never meant to marinate so long that you forget who you were before the brine. You were designed to process and release, to let things move so they don't turn into something that blocks you from the inside out. So check your spirit. Are you flowing? Or are you slowly becoming both the pickle and the stone? If this stirred something in you, don't ignore it. Have the conversation, or at least invite the conversation. Release what has been sitting too long. Choose flow over fixation. And if you know someone who's living in their brine, love them, but don't drink it. Whatever you do today, my darling dahlias, my precious petals, et mes petits choux, I hope you go out there and live your life in full-on Fl'Awesome Blossom. You'll see me next time.